The scent of roasting chicken and herbs hit Nathan Tucker the moment he opened the door to his ranch house, and for a split second, he thought he had stumbled into the wrong home entirely. He stood frozen in the doorway, dust from the trail still clinging to his boots, and the late afternoon sun of 1878 Texas casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Through the kitchen entrance, he could see her, a woman with dark honey-colored hair pinned loosely at her neck, moving with practiced ease around his cast-iron stove, as if she had cooked there 1,000 times before. She turned at the sound of his entrance, and her eyes went wide, a wooden spoon held aloft like a weapon. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the small living space, two strangers caught in an impossibly intimate moment. Her cheeks flushed pink, whether from the heat of the stove or embarrassment he could not tell. "I can explain," she said quickly, lowering the spoon but gripping it tighter. "The door was unlocked and I saw the storm coming from miles away. I have been traveling for 3 days, and I thought perhaps whoever lived here might not mind if I took shelter for just an hour or two. Then I saw you had provisions and I thought the least I could do was make dinner to repay the kindness of your roof, even if you were not here to grant it." Nathan removed his hat slowly, running a hand through his dark hair. He had been riding fence lines all day, checking for breaks after last week's stampede, and exhaustion had settled deep in his bones. The sight before him felt like a dream, or perhaps a mirage conjured by his lonely mind. He had lived alone on this spread just outside San Angelo for nearly 2 years now, ever since his father passed and left him the ranch. "There is no storm coming," he said carefully, moving further into the room. The woman's face fell, and she glanced toward the window where clear blue sky stretched endlessly. "Oh, I suppose I was mistaken." She set down the spoon and started to untie the apron she had somehow found and wrapped around her waist. "I will leave immediately. I am so sorry for the intrusion. I can leave payment for the food I used. Wait." The word came out rougher than he intended and she froze. Nathan cleared his throat. "You have already cooked it. Seems a waste to let it go uneaten. You said you have been traveling for 3 days. She nodded slowly, her hands still on the apron strings. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes, the dust on her simple blue traveling dress, the way her shoulders seemed to carry a weight beyond mere fatigue. "Then sit and eat," he said. "You look like you need it more than I do." "I made enough for 2 people," she replied quietly. "It seemed presumptuous to assume you would want to share your table with a stranger who broke into your home, even if I meant no harm." Nathan surprised himself by almost smiling. "In Texas, we call that hospitality, not breaking in, though usually folks wait for an invitation." He hung his hat on the peg by the door and moved to the kitchen basin to wash his hands. "I am Nathan Tucker. This is my ranch." "Beatrice Fletcher," she said, and there was something in the way she said her own name, a slight hesitation, as if she were testing out the sound of it. "Most people call me B." They sat across from each other at his small wooden table, the one his father had built 40 years ago when he first claimed this land. The chicken was perfectly roasted, seasoned with sage and thyme from the herb garden his mother had planted, which Nathan kept alive more out of stubborn memory than any culinary skill. There were potatoes, too, and carrots, and biscuits that were somehow both fluffy and golden despite his temperamental stove. "Where were you headed?" Nathan asked, watching as she ate with the careful, measured bites of someone trying to maintain dignity while clearly starving. Beatrice took a sip of water before answering. "Anywhere but where I came from." She met his eyes, and he saw steel beneath the exhaustion. "I left St. Louis 3 weeks ago. I was supposed to marry a man there, a banker twice my age who my father selected because of his money and connections. I smiled and nodded through the engagement, through the wedding planning, and then the night before the ceremony, I packed what I could carry and walked out the door. Your family must be looking for you. I expect they are. She broke apart a biscuit with her fingers. My father is not the kind of man who takes kindly to being embarrassed. But I could not do it. I could not stand at an altar and promise my life to a man who looked at me like I was another asset to acquire, another pretty thing to display in his home. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the words seeming to flow from some deep place she had kept locked away. I know what people will say, that I am foolish and reckless, that a woman alone has no prospects and no future. But I would rather face uncertainty than certainty of misery. Nathan found himself nodding. My father used to say that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Sounds to me like you have more courage than most men I know. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. That is kind of you to say. Most people have been less understanding. I worked in a hotel in Abilene for 2 weeks to earn enough money to keep traveling. The owner's wife took pity on me, I think. She gave me extra food and advice on which roads to take. Beatrice paused, pushing food around her plate. I was aiming for San Angelo. I heard there might be teaching positions available or work in one of the shops. I thought a bigger town might mean more opportunities, more places where a single woman could make her way without too many questions. San Angelo is only 5 miles south, Nathan said. You nearly made it. I saw your ranch from the ridge and thought I might ask for directions, but then I saw no one around and the door was unlocked and I just felt so tired. She looked down at her hands. That is no excuse, of course. I should not have entered uninvited. Beatrice, he said, and she looked up at the sound of her full name on his tongue. I have been eating burned beans and stale bread for the better part of 6 months. You cooked the best meal I have had since my mother passed 5 years ago. Far as I am concerned, you are welcome at my table any time. The smile she gave him was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of light that had been hidden behind clouds. They finished eating as the sky outside turned from blue to orange to deep purple, and Nathan found himself talking more than he had in months. He told her about the ranch, about growing up on this land, about the challenges of running a cattle operation mostly by himself with only 2 ranch hands who came in during busy seasons. Beatrice listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention, not just being polite. She wanted to know about the cattle breeds, about how he managed water rights, about what happened to the ranch during droughts. In turn, she told him about St. Louis, about the suffocating social expectations, about her love of books and learning that her father had considered frivolous for a woman. I taught myself mathematics, she said as they cleared the dishes together. My brother's tutor would leave his books in the study, and I would sneak in and copy the problems. I wanted to understand how numbers worked, how they could predict and explain things. My father caught me once and told me it would hurt my marriage prospects to be too educated. Seems to me that any man who would be threatened by an intelligent wife is not much of a man at all. Beatrice stopped mid-motion, a plate suspended in her hands, and looked at him with such intensity that Nathan felt heat rise up his neck. You are not what I expected, Nathan Tucker. What did you expect? I do not know. Anger, perhaps. Suspicion. Most men I have encountered on this journey have looked at me like I am either an object to be claimed or a problem to be solved. You are neither of those things. Nathan took the plate from her hands and set it on the counter. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and the reality of the situation settled between them. It is too dangerous for you to travel to San Angelo tonight. The road is not well marked and there are coyotes, sometimes worse. You should stay here and I will take you into town in the morning." He saw the conflict play across her face, propriety warring with practicality. "I cannot impose further on your hospitality. It is not an imposition. I have a spare room, belonged to my sister before she married and moved to Austin. The sheets are clean and the door has a lock on the inside." He held her gaze steadily. "You will be safe here, I give you my word." After a long moment, Beatrice nodded. "Thank you. Truly." Nathan showed her to the small bedroom off the main hall, bringing her a clean pitcher of water and an extra quilt. He lay awake in his own room for a long time after, listening to the familiar sounds of the house and thinking about honey-colored hair and eyes that held both vulnerability and fierce determination. He told himself it was simple kindness, helping a woman in need. But there had been something in the way she smiled at him across the dinner table, something in the ease of their conversation, that felt like the beginning of something he had not dared to hope for in a very long time. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Nathan dressed quickly and found Beatrice already in the kitchen, having apparently helped herself to his stores once again. She had changed her dress and pinned her hair more neatly, but there were still shadows under her eyes. "I could not sleep much," she admitted when she caught him watching her. "I kept thinking about what comes next. I have enough money for perhaps 2 weeks of boarding if I am careful. I need to find work quickly." They ate breakfast with less conversation than the night before, the morning light bringing with it a certain awkwardness that had been absent in the evening shadows. Nathan hitched up his wagon and helped Beatrice climb onto the bench seat, very aware of how his hand felt against her waist, even through layers of fabric. The ride into San Angelo took just under an hour. The town was growing, new buildings going up along the main street, more businesses arriving every month. Nathan pointed out the hotel where she might find lodging, the general store, the schoolhouse. "The teacher there, Mrs. Morrison, is getting up in years," he said. "I heard her mention once that she would like an assistant, someone to help with the younger children. Might be worth asking." Beatrice turned to him with bright eyes. "That would be perfect. Thank you for telling me." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the hotel, but neither of them moved to climb down. People passed by on the wooden sidewalks, going about their morning business, and Nathan was suddenly very aware that this might be the last time he saw her. She would find work, build a life in town, and he would go back to his ranch and his solitary existence. "Beatrice," he started, then stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. She reached over and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. "I will not forget your kindness, Nathan Tucker. You treated me with respect when you had no reason to trust me. That means more than I can say. Could I call on you?" The words came out in a rush. "Properly, I mean. I come into town most Saturdays for supplies. I could stop by and see how you are settling in." Her smile was like the sunrise all over again. "I would like that very much." Nathan helped her down from the wagon, and she stood on the sidewalk looking up at him with her small bag clutched in her hands. He wanted to say more, to find some way to keep her there just a moment longer, but people were starting to stare, and he knew she needed to get inside and arrange for a room before they all jumped to the wrong conclusions. "Saturday, then," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. He forced himself to drive away, looking back only once to see her still standing there, watching him go. The week that followed was the longest of Nathan's life. He threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy, repairing fence posts, checking on the cattle, fixing the leak in the barn roof he had been ignoring for months. His ranch hands, 2 brothers named Jim and Tom who came out twice a week to help with the heavy work, noticed the change in him immediately. "You are awful chipper for a man mucking out stalls," Jim observed on Thursday. "Something happened we should know about." Nathan just shook his head and kept working, but he could not stop his mind from wandering back to Beatrice. He wondered if she had found the teaching position, if the hotel was treating her well, if she was eating enough. He wondered if she thought about him even a fraction as much as he thought about her. Saturday morning, he rose before dawn and took more care with his appearance than he had in years. He shaved carefully, put on his best shirt, the dark blue one that his sister had sent him last Christmas. He polished his boots until they shone and even combed oil through his hair. When he caught his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The ride into San Angelo felt interminable. He conducted his usual business at the general store, purchasing supplies and chatting with the owner about cattle prices and weather predictions, but his mind was elsewhere. Finally, with his errands complete, he made his way to the hotel where he had left Beatrice the previous Saturday. The desk clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up as Nathan entered. "Help you, sir? I am looking for Miss Beatrice Fletcher. She is staying here." The clerk's expression shifted to something knowing and slightly amused. "Ah, yes, Miss Fletcher. She is not here at the moment. Last I saw, she was heading toward the schoolhouse. Got herself hired as assistant teacher, she did. Started this week." Pride swelled in Nathan's chest. "Thank you kindly." He turned to go, then paused. "She is doing well then, settling in all right, seems to be. Keeps to herself mostly, very proper. Though I will say, you are not the first gentleman to come calling. She is a handsome woman and unattached, bound to draw attention." Nathan felt something cold settle in his stomach, but he nodded politely and left. Of course other men would be interested in Beatrice. She was beautiful and intelligent and brave. He had no claim on her beyond one dinner and a wagon ride. Still, the thought of someone else calling on her, someone else making her smile the way she had smiled at him, filled him with an unfamiliar jealousy. He found her outside the schoolhouse, sitting on the steps with a book in her lap, her face turned up toward the sun. She looked peaceful, more relaxed than she had the previous week. When she saw him approaching, her whole face lit up and she stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "Nathan, I was hoping you would come. I said I would." He gestured to the schoolhouse behind her. "I heard you got the position." "I did. Mrs. Morrison is wonderful. She has been teaching for 30 years and has more patience than anyone I have ever met. I am learning so much from her already." Beatrice's enthusiasm poured out in a rush of words. "The children are delightful, even the troublesome ones. And the pay is not much, but it is enough for my room and board with a little left over. I can actually see a future here, Nathan. A real future that is mine, not something chosen for me." "I am glad," he said, and meant it with his whole heart. "You deserve that." They walked together through town, Beatrice pointing out places she had discovered during the week, sharing stories about her students and the other townspeople she had met. Nathan listened, content just to be near her, to watch the way she gestured as she talked, the way she laughed at herself when she got particularly animated. They had lunch at the small restaurant on Main Street, and Nathan found himself telling her about his week too, about the new calf that had been born, about fixing the roof, and dealing with a coyote that had been harassing his chickens. Ordinary things, the stuff of everyday life, but with Beatrice listening it all felt important, worth sharing. "I like hearing about the ranch," she said over apple pie. "You talk about it with such passion. It is clear how much you love the land." "It is all I have ever known," Nathan admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I should want more, if I should be restless like so many young men these days, heading west to seek fortune. But every time I stand on that ridge and look out over the property, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." I think that is a rare gift, knowing where you belong. Beatrice's voice was soft. I spent my whole life in St. Louis feeling like I was in the wrong place. Being here, teaching those children, walking down these streets, it feels right in a way nothing ever has before. And me? Nathan asked before he could stop himself. Does this, us talking like this, does it feel right? She reached across the table and took his hand, right there in the restaurant where anyone could see. Yes, it feels very right. From that day forward, Nathan made the trip into San Angelo every Saturday without fail. He would complete his errands and then spend the afternoon with Beatrice, walking, talking, sometimes just sitting together in companionable silence. They attended the town dance in October, and Nathan held her in his arms as they moved to fiddle music, very aware of every place their bodies touched. People are talking, Beatrice murmured as they swayed together. Mrs. Morrison asked me this week if you had declared your intentions. What did you tell her? That I was not sure what your intentions were. She looked up at him through her lashes. Are you going to enlighten me, Nathan Tucker? He pulled her slightly closer, probably closer than was strictly proper. My intentions are entirely honorable, Miss Fletcher. I intend to court you properly, for as long as you will allow it. And then what? Then I intend to ask you to marry me and spend the rest of my life making you happy. Beatrice stumbled slightly and Nathan steadied her. That is quite the plan, she said, her voice shaky. Too presumptuous. No. She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Not presumptuous enough. Why are we waiting? Nathan's heart hammered in his chest. Beatrice, we have only known each other for 2 months. I knew after one evening, she said firmly. I knew when you let me stay in your home and treated me with respect. I knew when you listened to me talk about mathematics and did not tell me I was being unladylike. I knew when you looked at me like I was a person, not a prize or a problem. She stopped dancing entirely, forcing him to stop too. I am not saying we need to marry tomorrow, but I am saying that I do not need more time to know what I want. Nathan looked down at this incredible woman in his arms, this brave, brilliant, beautiful woman who had literally walked into his life through an unlocked door, and felt everything in him settle into certainty. Neither do I. He proposed properly the following Saturday, with a ring that had belonged to his mother, on one knee in front of the schoolhouse where they had met for their first proper outing. Beatrice said yes before he finished asking the question, and then she was in his arms and he was spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. They were married in the San Angelo church in December, with Mrs. Morrison and Nathan's sister and her husband in attendance, along with Jim and Tom and what seemed like half the town. Beatrice wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Nathan thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The preacher smiled at them as they stood before him. Do you, Nathan Alexander Tucker, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Nathan said, his voice strong and sure. And do you, Beatrice Marie Fletcher, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Beatrice said, squeezing his hands tightly. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Nathan cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her for the first time, soft and sweet, a promise of all the kisses to come. The small congregation applauded, and when they pulled apart, Beatrice was beaming. Hello, Mrs. Tucker, Nathan whispered. Hello, Mr. Tucker, she whispered back. They held the wedding supper at the hotel, a simple affair with roast beef and potatoes and cake that Mrs. Morrison had made. Nathan's sister Sarah pulled him aside at one point, grinning widely. I never thought I would see you look at anyone the way Father looked at Mother, she said. You have found a good one, Nathan. Do not let her get away. I do not intend to. As the sun set, Nathan loaded Beatrice's belongings into his wagon and they rode back to the ranch together, his wife's hand clasped in his. The stars were coming out overhead, brilliant and countless in the clear Texas sky. "Are you nervous?" Nathan asked as they turned onto his property. "A little," Beatrice admitted. "Everything is changing so fast. 3 months ago I was a runaway, terrified and alone. Now I am married, I have a teaching position, I have a home." She looked over at him. "I have you, you do," he confirmed, "for as long as you want me." "That would be forever then." They reached the ranch house, the same one where Beatrice had let herself in all those months ago, and Nathan helped her down from the wagon. He swept her up into his arms, making her yelp with surprise and laughter, and carried her over the threshold. "Welcome home, wife," he said, setting her gently on her feet. Beatrice looked around the house with new eyes, seeing it now as her home, not just his. "I think we should paint the bedroom," she said suddenly. "Something cheerful, and we need new curtains in the kitchen. These are falling apart." Nathan laughed, pulling her close. "You can paint everything in the house rainbow colors if it makes you happy. As long as you are here, nothing else matters." She tilted her face up for another kiss, and this one was deeper, more urgent, full of all the longing they had carefully kept in check during their courtship. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice took his hand and led him toward the bedroom. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, awkward and perfect, everything that first times should be between two people who genuinely love each other. Afterward they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Beatrice's head on Nathan's chest, his fingers trailing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Tell me about your dreams," she said softly. "Not just for the ranch, but for us, for our life together." Nathan thought for a moment. "I want to build the ranch into something really successful, enough to hire more hands so I am not working quite so hard all the time. I want time to spend with you to take you places, show you more of Texas. And I want children if you do too. I want this house filled with noise and laughter and life." "I want that too," Beatrice said. "I want to keep teaching as long as I can, at least until children come. I want to help you with the ranch, learn the business side of it. I want us to be true partners in everything." "We will be," Nathan promised. "I swear it." Winter turned to spring, and they settled into married life with surprising ease. Beatrice continued teaching 3 days a week, refusing to give it up despite some of the town matrons suggesting it was not proper for a married woman. Nathan supported her completely, even adjusting his schedule to drive her into town and pick her up on teaching days. She also proved to be an unexpected asset to the ranch operations. Her mathematical skills meant she could track finances and inventory with precision Nathan had never managed. She organized his record keeping, identified areas where they were spending too much, and even suggested a breeding program that would improve their herd quality over time. "Where did you learn all this?" Nathan asked one evening as they went over the books together. "I told you, I taught myself mathematics, and I read everything I could get my hands on, including articles about animal husbandry and land management." She pointed to a column of numbers. "See here. If we sell off these older cows and invest in younger breeding stock, we will take a short-term loss, but in 3 years we will have a much stronger herd." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "You are remarkable, do you know that? I am just using the brain God gave me. Something I was never allowed to do before." By summer, the ranch was thriving better than it had in years. They hired an additional hand, a young man named Charlie who worked hard and learned fast. With more help, Nathan had time to add on to the house, building a proper dining room and a larger bedroom for them, with plans for children's rooms in the future. Beatrice proved to be a natural on horseback too, once Nathan taught her to ride properly. She loved riding out to check fence lines with him, or just galloping across the open prairie with the wind in her hair. Sometimes they would pack a lunch and ride out to the ridge where she had first spotted the ranch, eating sandwiches and watching the clouds drift by. "You ever miss St. Louis?" Nathan asked one such afternoon. Beatrice considered the question seriously. "I miss my mother sometimes. She was a kind woman, just too timid to stand up to my father. I hope she is all right." She leaned back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her. "But no, I do not miss the life I had there. I do not miss the social obligations and the constant judgment and the feeling of being trapped. Here I can breathe." "Did you ever hear from your family after you left?" "My mother sent one letter, forwarded through the hotel in Abilene. She said my father was furious, that the banker broke off all business ties with him, that I had disgraced the family name." Beatrice's voice was steady. "She also said that she understood why I left, and that she hoped I found what I was looking for. That was her way of saying goodbye and giving me her blessing. I wrote back once to let her know I was safe and married. I do not expect to hear from them again." Nathan held her tighter. "Their loss. I cannot imagine cutting off a daughter like you. When we have children, I want them to know they can be whoever they want to be. I want our daughters to learn mathematics and our sons to learn cooking. I want them to know that there is no one right way to live a life." "They will," Nathan promised. "We will make sure of it." In September, nearly a year after that fateful evening when Beatrice had let herself into his house, she came to Nathan with news that made his heart soar. They were going to be parents. The baby was due in the spring, right around the time they would celebrate their first wedding anniversary. Nathan immediately wanted her to stop teaching, to rest and take care of herself, but Beatrice refused. "I am pregnant, not dying. Mrs. Morrison needs me and I need the work. It keeps my mind active." They compromised, agreeing she would cut back to 2 days a week and stop entirely in her last month. Nathan found himself worrying constantly, but Beatrice bloomed throughout her pregnancy, growing rounder and more radiant with each passing week. In March, after 12 hours of labor that aged Nathan a lifetime, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Thomas William Tucker, after Nathan's father. Nathan held his son for the first time with shaking hands, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the small face that already seemed to hold both his features and Beatrice's. "We made this," he said in wonder. "We made a whole person." Beatrice, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than ever, smiled up at him from the bed. "We did. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. Nathan carefully handed the baby back to her and sat on the edge of the bed, watching as she guided their son to nurse for the first time. "You are amazing, Beatrice. Watching you bring him into this world, I have never been more in awe of anyone." "Well, I could not have done it without you." She caught his hand and squeezed. "Literally. You were here every moment, you never left my side. Some husbands do not even stay in the house during the birth. I could never have left you to face that alone. Baby Thomas was a good baby, sleeping in reasonable stretches and only fussing when hungry or needing changing." Beatrice recovered well from the birth, and soon she was back to riding around the ranch with Thomas tied against her chest in a wrap she had fashioned, showing him his future inheritance even though he was far too young to understand. Nathan found himself falling even more deeply in love with his wife as he watched her mother their son. She was patient but firm, loving but not indulgent, teaching even when Thomas was too small to comprehend. She read to him constantly, sang to him, talked to him about everything from cattle breeding to mathematics. "You know he cannot understand you yet," Nathan said one evening, watching her explain crop rotation to their 3-month-old. "Not yet," Beatrice agreed. But one day he will, and I want him to grow up hearing all kinds of conversations. I want knowledge to be as natural to him as breathing. When Thomas was 6 months old, Beatrice announced she wanted to go back to teaching part-time. Nathan's sister Sarah, who lived in Austin but visited regularly, had expressed interest in moving closer, and she offered to watch Thomas 2 days a week. It was perfect timing, giving Beatrice the outlet she needed while ensuring their son was cared for by family. The years flowed by in a pattern of love and work and growth. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, growing to be one of the most successful operations in the county. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler, then a boy who followed his father everywhere and absorbed his mother's lessons like a sponge. When Thomas was 3, Beatrice became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin girls they named Caroline Marie and Charlotte Ann. Nathan was outnumbered now, 3-1, and he loved every minute of it. The girls were as different as night and day, Caroline quiet and thoughtful like her mother, Charlotte bold and adventurous like her father. Their home was filled with exactly the noise and life Nathan had dreamed of on their wedding night. Children's laughter rang through the rooms, toys scattered across the floor, small footprints tracked mud through the kitchen. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan and Beatrice managed to steal away for an evening while Sarah watched the children. They rode out to their special spot on the ridge, bringing a blanket and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. 5 years, Beatrice mused, leaning against Nathan's shoulder. Do you remember that first night, when I broke into your house and cooked you dinner? Best breaking and entering that ever happened to me, Nathan said with a grin. I saw you standing there at my stove and thought I had lost my mind. I was so scared, Beatrice admitted. Not of you, but of what I had done. Running away from home, traveling alone, letting myself into a stranger's house. I kept thinking about what could have gone wrong, all the dangers I had faced, and then you came home and you were kind. You were brave, Nathan corrected. The bravest person I had ever met. You still are. Beatrice turned to face him fully. I have never regretted it, you know. Not for one single moment. Every choice I made that brought me to you, to this life, was the right one. Even when the twins are both screaming at 2 in the morning, she laughed. Even then. Especially then, because you are right there with me, walking the floor and singing off-key lullabies. Nathan pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply in the fading light. I love you, Beatrice Tucker. More than I did on our wedding day, more than I did yesterday, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for leaving your door unlocked that day. Thank you for walking through it. They stayed on the ridge until full darkness fell and the stars came out, talking and laughing and planning for the future. They discussed expanding the ranch house again to give each child their own room as they grew older. Beatrice mentioned wanting to establish a small school on their property for the ranch children in the area, so they did not have to make the long trip into San Angelo every day. Nathan suggested teaching Thomas and the girls to really work the ranch, so they would understand every aspect of the operation. Time continued its steady march forward. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Caroline showed an aptitude for numbers that exceeded even her mother's skills, while Charlotte turned out to be a gifted horsewoman who could ride better than most of the hands by age 12. Beatrice eventually stopped teaching in town to focus on her family and the ranch, but she did establish the small school she had dreamed of, teaching not just her own children but the sons and daughters of their ranch hands and neighboring families. She insisted that all children attend, boys and girls alike, and taught them all the same curriculum. Nathan built her a small schoolhouse on the property, with proper desks and a blackboard and shelves for books. It became a source of pride for the whole community, and other ranchers started sending their children there too. Beatrice taught without pay, considering it her contribution to building a better, more educated Texas. When Thomas turned 18, he told his parents he wanted to study animal science at the Agricultural College in Austin. Nathan was torn between pride and sadness, not ready to lose his son even though he knew Thomas would come back to the ranch eventually. Beatrice encouraged it wholeheartedly, insisting that education would only make Thomas a better rancher. "Let him go," she told Nathan the night before Thomas left. "Let him see the world beyond this ranch. He will come back, I promise you. This land is in his blood the same way it is in yours." She was right, of course. Thomas returned 2 years later with a degree and new ideas for improving their breeding program, full of enthusiasm for implementing what he had learned. Caroline announced she wanted to study mathematics at a women's college in the East, shocking everyone but her mother. Charlotte declared she never wanted to leave the ranch at all, which suited her just fine. The ranch house saw additions and changes over the years. They added a large wrap-around porch where the family gathered in the evenings. Beatrice planted flowers everywhere, bringing color and life to the dusty landscape. Nathan built her a library, filling it with books ordered from catalogs and brought back from trips to larger cities. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and market crashes. There were years when money was tight, and they had to make difficult decisions about which expenses to cut. But they faced everything together, never keeping secrets, always working as the true partners they had promised to be on their wedding night. On their 20th anniversary, their children, now grown, threw them a surprise party. The ranch house overflowed with people, neighbors and friends they had made over 2 decades in San Angelo, former students of Beatrice's, business associates of Nathan's. There was music and dancing and food enough to feed an army. Nathan stood on the porch watching it all, feeling overwhelmed by the life they had built. Beatrice found him there, slipping her hand into his exactly the way she had that first afternoon in the restaurant, thinking deep thoughts. She asked, "Thinking about how different my life would be if you had not let yourself into my house that day," he said. "I would probably still be here alone, eating burned beans and talking to the cattle." "I think fate would have brought us together somehow," Beatrice said. "We were meant to find each other." "You really believe that?" "I do. Every moment of my life led me to your door, Nathan. Every choice, every hardship, every joy. It was all a path leading me home to you." Nathan pulled her into a slow dance right there on the porch, with their children and grandchildren and friends celebrating inside. She rested her head on his shoulder the way she had on their first dance 20 years earlier, and he was struck by how right it still felt, how perfectly she still fit against him. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For being brave enough to run away. For being desperate enough to walk into a stranger's house. For being yourself, exactly as you are." He pulled back to look at her face, still beautiful even with the lines that time and laughter had etched around her eyes. "Thank you for making enough dinner for 2 people that night." Beatrice smiled up at him, her eyes bright with happy tears. "That was the best decision I ever made. Well, that and saying yes when you proposed." They danced until someone called them inside to cut the anniversary cake. And then they were surrounded by family and love, and the life they had built together from one chance encounter on a dusty Texas ranch. In the years that followed, they became grandparents multiple times over. Thomas married a schoolteacher from San Angelo and gave them 3 grandchildren who loved visiting the ranch. Caroline married a professor she met at college and had twin boys, much to Beatrice's delight. Charlotte married one of the ranch hands, a good man named Daniel, and they stayed on the property, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Nathan and Beatrice grew older. Nathan's hair went white and his back developed a permanent ache, but he still rode out most mornings to check on things, unwilling to fully let go. Beatrice's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, but she still read voraciously and kept detailed records of everything happening on the ranch. They moved a bit slower, needed more rest, but their love remained as strong as ever. One evening in their late 60s, they sat together on the porch watching the sun set, the same way they had done thousands of times before. Charlotte's youngest child was chasing chickens in the yard while her older children helped with evening chores. The sounds of family and home surrounded them. "You have any regrets?" Nathan asked, a question that had been on his mind lately as he reflected on his life. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that my mother never got to meet you or see her grandchildren. I regret that my father's pride kept him from ever reconciling with me. I regret that I cannot do as much as I used to, that my body is failing me in small ways. But I do not regret any of the big things. I do not regret leaving St. Louis or walking into your house that day or any of the choices we have made together. Every struggle was worth it, Nathan. Every hard year, every challenge, every moment of doubt. It was all worth it for this." She gestured to the scene before them, the ranch thriving under Charlotte and Daniel's care, the grandchildren playing, the life they had built. "This is everything I never knew I was allowed to dream of." Nathan took her hand, his rough and calloused from decades of ranch work, hers soft despite the arthritis. "I love you, Beatrice Tucker. I have loved you every single day for 42 years, and I will love you every day I have left. I love you too, cowboy." It was her nickname for him, one she had used since those early days when he had seemed like something out of the adventure stories she read. "Thank you for leaving your door unlocked. Thank you for having the courage to walk through it." As darkness fell and the stars came out overhead, their grandchildren were called inside for dinner. Nathan and Beatrice sat a while longer, hands clasped, watching the lights come on in the windows of the home they had built together. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew these were precious moments. That time was the one thing even they could not wrangle or tame. But they also knew, with bone-deep certainty, that whatever time they had left would be spent exactly like this, together, surrounded by the family and life and love that had grown from one woman's desperate courage and one man's simple kindness on a dusty Texas evening all those years ago. Their story did not end with grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It ended the way the best love stories do, with two people who chose each other every single day, who built a life together through hard work and laughter and unwavering partnership, who proved that sometimes the most extraordinary love begins with something as ordinary as an unlocked door and dinner for two. Years later, after both Nathan and Beatrice had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their grandchildren would gather at the ranch and tell stories about them. They would talk about how Nathan would still open doors for Beatrice even when they were both in their 80s, how she would still cook his favorite meals and make enough for two even when her hands barely worked. They would tell the story of how they met, that impossible, wonderful tale of a runaway bride who walked into a stranger's house and found her home. And the ranch itself stood as a testament to their love, still thriving under family management, still welcoming, still the kind of place where an unlocked door meant hospitality rather than carelessness. The library Beatrice had filled with books remained a gathering place for the family, and Nathan's carefully maintained breeding program continued to produce some of the finest cattle in Texas. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry forward the values Nathan and Beatrice had instilled, the belief in education for everyone, the importance of hard work and integrity, the conviction that love and partnership could overcome any obstacle. They would tell their own children about great-grandparents who had lived a love story for the ages, who had proved that sometimes the most important decision you can make is to be brave enough to walk through an open door and see where it leads. And on certain evenings, when the sunset painted the Texas sky in brilliant colors and the wind whispered through the prairie grass, those who knew the story swore they could still feel Nathan and Beatrice there, watching over the land they had loved, the family they had built, the legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their love had become part of the ranch itself, woven into every fence post and barn beam, living on in every generation that called that place home. It was a story that began with an unlocked door and ended with forever, exactly as the best love stories should.